The day started like any other, with the same busy noise, the same rush, and the same tired feeling that had become normal. The listener, a quiet person who often kept thoughts inside rather than sharing them, walked through the usual path toward work. There was nothing special about that morning. People were talking loudly, cars were moving fast, and the whole world felt like it was going too quickly for anyone to catch their breath. The listener had been carrying a heavy kind of stress for weeks, a kind that does not show on the outside, but keeps the heart tense on the inside. It felt like the mind was always full, but never in the right way. On that day, they decided to stop by a small cafe, not because they had time, but because something inside whispered to slow down, even if just for a minute. The cafe was simple, not too bright, not too fancy, and the air smelled like fresh bread and warm coffee. It was not crowded, which was already a relief. The listener found a seat near the window, placed the bag on the floor, and took a deep breath as if trying to settle the thoughts that kept running nonstop. That was the moment when something new entered the picture. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was soft, like a gentle hand resting on a tired shoulder. A piano melody drifted through the quiet space. At first, the listener did not pay attention, thinking it was just background music. But within a few seconds, the sound touched something inside in a way no words had managed to do for a long time. The cafe had a small speaker in the corner, and from it came a simple yet beautiful classical piece. The notes were calm, slow, and full of emotion. The listener did not know the composer. They did not know the title. But the feeling was clear. It was like breathing out after holding in a breath for too long. Their shoulders loosened without effort. Their heartbeat slowed down just a little. And for the first time in many days, the world outside seemed softer. The people, the cars, the noise, everything felt distant. As if the music had built a quiet space just for them, the listener closed their eyes. Only for a moment, to let the sound fill the space inside their mind. It felt warm and calm, something they had not felt in weeks. They did not expect music without words to feel so honest, so close. It was surprising, almost confusing, that a few notes could reach such a deep place. Even when they opened their eyes again, the feeling stayed. They stared outside the window at the people walking quickly, everyone in their own rush, and wondered if any of them felt what they felt just now. Probably not. Most people did not stop long enough to notice anything calming around them. The listener realized they had not stopped either, not for a long time. The cup of coffee arrived, but even before taking the first sip, the listener felt more awake and present just because of the music. It was like the melody was telling them, without words, that life did not always need to be so fast or heavy, that sometimes slowing down for a few minutes could make the whole day feel different. As the track continued, the listener found themselves paying attention to every detail of the sound, the way the notes rose gently, the way they fell softly, the way each moment connected smoothly to the next. It was peaceful, but not empty. It was emotional, but not overwhelming. It was the kind of balance the listener had been searching for without even knowing. They wondered why they had never listened to classical music before. Maybe they thought it was too old-fashioned or too complicated. Maybe they believed it was only for certain people or certain places. But now, hearing it in a small cafe with a warm cup of coffee, it felt perfect, real, human. The piece ended slowly, and the cafe returned to its quiet, normal sound. But inside, the listener still carried that feeling, the way a soft breeze stays on the skin even after the wind passes. They took a sip of coffee and smiled a little, the first natural smile they had felt in days. When they left the cafe, the world had not changed, but something inside had. The listener walked down the street, and though the noise was still there, it did not feel as heavy. The mind felt clearer. The heart felt lighter, and they could not explain why. They knew the music had something to do with it. Later that day, while sitting at their desk at work, they remembered the melody again. It played in their mind, even though they did not know the exact tune. It was just a feeling, a soft reminder that peace existed somewhere, even in a small moment. Work tasks still piled up, emails still came in. But the listener handled everything with a calmer approach, as if a part of the morning had stayed with them. When lunch break came, they opened their phone and searched for calm piano classical music, even though they had never searched for anything like that before. They played a random piece, and within seconds, they felt the same warmth spreading across their mind. Maybe not the same melody, but the same depth. They listened quietly while eating, feeling grateful for something so simple, yet so comforting. By the time the workday ended, the listener already felt curious. What other music could make them feel this way? What other sounds had they been ignoring because life had been too loud? The thought stayed with them as they made their way home. They noticed small things: the gentle wind, the sound of distant birds, the soft evening light, all things they usually missed. Maybe the music opened something inside, a door that had been closed for too long. At home, they placed their things down, changed into comfortable clothes, and sat on the couch with the lights dimmed. They played another classical piece online, this time a soft string melody. Again, the feeling filled the room. The stresses of the day faded slowly. Like fog melting in the morning sun, they leaned back, letting the sound guide their breathing. In that moment, they realized something important. It was not just the music itself. It was the space the music created inside them. A space where thoughts could settle instead of spinning. A space where emotions could breathe. A space where the world felt gentle again. It felt like meeting a part of themselves they had forgotten, one that was calmer, quieter, and more open. A part that had been drowned out by noise, pressure, and endless busy days. As the music played, they remembered the cafe and how the simple melody had changed the tone of an entire day. They wondered if other people had moments like that. Moments where something small becomes unexpectedly meaningful. The listener stayed there for a long time, not doing anything, just allowing the music to carry them through memories, calm thoughts, and gentle feelings. They realized they had not taken this kind of pause in a very long time. Life had been about routines, responsibilities, expectations, but not about breathing. That night, before sleeping, they listened to one more classical piece. It was slow and soothing, like a quiet lullaby made for adults who forget how to rest. The listener closed their eyes and felt the weight in their chest loosen. The mind settled peacefully, without the usual rush of thoughts. Sleep came easier than it had in weeks. The next morning, they woke up with a different kind of energy. Not excitement, not joy, but a calm steadiness. They realized that one moment of music had changed the direction of their entire week. It had shown them a side of themselves that was still capable of peace, as they prepared for another day. The listener knew one thing clearly: they wanted to hear more. They wanted to feel more of what that gentle piano melody had given them. They wanted to understand why classical music felt like a soft conversation with the soul. The journey had only begun, and they did not know where it would lead. But they knew this. Something beautiful had entered their life, quietly and unexpectedly, and they were ready to follow it. The next few days passed gently, almost like the slow notes from the piano pieces the listener had begun to explore. Something inside them had shifted after that morning in the cafe. It wasn't dramatic or loud. It was a quiet change, a soft pull that made them want to seek out that same warmth again. Every evening, after the long hours of work and the usual routine, they found themselves sitting down with their phone or laptop, searching for more classical music. At first, they didn't know where to start. There were so many names, so many types of pieces, so many instruments. The listener had always thought classical music was meant for special events or people who studied music deeply. But now, they realized it was simply another way to feel something honest. They didn't worry about being an expert. They only followed what made their heart feel calm. They began by typing simple words like peaceful strings or relaxing violin. The music that came up filled their room with soft emotion. Sometimes it was a quiet piano. Sometimes it was a gentle violin melody that rose and fell like a soft wave. At times, the sounds felt like a memory they had forgotten. Other times, they felt like a new story starting inside them. The listener found themselves waiting for these evening moments. After a busy day filled with noise, tasks, and the same old stress, this time with music felt like a small escape. Sitting alone in their room, lights dimmed, With the sound of a cello or a piano echoing softly, it felt like the world slowed down. The music didn't ask for anything. It didn't demand attention. It simply existed, and somehow, that was enough to make the listener feel lighter. One evening, after a long, tiring day, the listener sat by the window with a cup of tea. They played a piece that began with soft strings and then slowly grew fuller. As the melody grew deeper, something inside them softened. They watched the street outside, people walking, cars passing, lights glowing in windows across the road. Everything looked ordinary, but with the music playing, felt meaningful. The listener noticed how the music seemed to guide their emotions. When the melody arose, they felt hopeful. When it softened, they felt peaceful. It was almost like the music understood feelings they couldn't express with words. For a moment, they didn't feel alone. They felt seen not by a person, but by a sound. After a few days of listening, they became curious about why classical music felt this way. They searched small facts here and there, learning how each composer wrote from experiences, some happy, some sad, some full of longing. Even without words, the listener could sense these emotions. It amazed them how music created hundreds of years ago still touched someone living in a busy modern life. The listener began to build a small playlist, adding pieces that made them smile, relax, or breathe deeper. Every track felt like a piece of the puzzle they were trying to understand about themselves. It wasn't about being a music expert. It was about reconnecting with feelings they had pushed aside for too long. One night, while scrolling through videos, the listener saw a short clip of an orchestra performing live. It wasn't something they had ever watched before. The musicians sat in perfect formation, each holding their instruments with focus and care. The conductor moved with smooth, expressive gestures, guiding every note as if painting the air, even through a screen. The listener felt something powerful. They were amazed at how so many different instruments, violin, cello, flute, clarinet, and more could blend so perfectly. Each sound had its own voice, yet together, they created something bigger. It felt like watching people speak in a language without words, but still understanding everything. From that moment, the listener found themselves searching for more live orchestra clips. They watched how musicians closed their eyes when playing, how the conductor moved, how the audience listened so quietly. Something about it felt magical, almost sacred. It made the listener wonder what it would be like to hear this music in person, not through a phone, not through earphones, but in a real concert hall with sound filling every corner. Over the next week, the listener's curiosity grew. They found themselves looking up local concerts, small performances, community orchestras, anything close enough to experience live classical music. They weren't sure what to expect or whether they would even understand the pieces. But something inside them kept whispering that they needed to hear it for real. Meanwhile, their daily life quietly improved. They didn't even notice it at first. Their mornings felt calmer. They woke up with less heaviness in their chest. At work, when things became stressful, they played a soft piece quietly in the background, letting it guide their breathing. Instead of getting overwhelmed, they found themselves handling everything with more control. Even their interactions with people changed slightly. They were more patient, more observant. The music had taught them to slow down, to listen, to feel things gently instead of rushing through everything. They noticed details they had ignored before: the way sunlight touched the floor, the sound of the wind against the window, the way warm drinks felt in their hands. These small things started becoming moments of peace instead of things they overlooked. One afternoon, as they walked home from work, a thought came to them. Why did it take so long to discover something that felt so natural? Maybe life had been too busy, too fast. Or maybe they were finally ready to feel things deeply again. Whatever the reason, they were grateful. That weekend, the listener decided to dedicate a few hours just to explore more music. They sat on the floor with cushions around, opened their playlist, and let the pieces play one after another. As the music flowed, memories came and went, childhood moments, small joys, losses, they still carried quietly. The music didn't judge or overwhelm. It held space for everything. At one point, a strong orchestral piece began. It felt different from the soft melodies they usually preferred. It was powerful, full, almost like a storm building, and then slowly calming down. At first, the listener wasn't sure if they liked it, but as the piece went on, they realized it gave them a strange kind of strength. It made them sit up straighter, breathe deeper. It felt like the sound was telling them that it was okay to feel strong again. This moment opened a new door. Classical music wasn't just calming, it could also be powerful, bold, full of energy. It wasn't just quiet relaxation, it was emotion in all its forms. The listener found themselves fascinated by this discovery. It was as if they had entered a world with endless rooms, filled with a different emotional color. The more they listened, the more they realized that classical music wasn't distant or complicated at all. It was simply honest. It expressed things people felt every day: stress, peace, sadness, hope, strength, longing. It was all there. Days passed, and classical music became part of the listener's routine. It wasn't something they forced. It was something that came naturally, like a comforting friend visiting at the right moments. Some nights they listened before sleeping. Some mornings they played something soft to start the day. Other times, they listened while cooking or cleaning, letting the music make ordinary moments feel warmer. One evening, while looking through local event listings, the listener found a small advertisement for a live classical concert happening the following week. It wasn't a big event, just a modest performance at a nearby hall. But the moment they saw it, their heart beat a little faster. This was it. The chance to experience everything they had felt through headphones. But in real life, without overthinking, they booked a ticket. Only one ticket. It felt strange to go alone, but also exciting. This journey with music was personal, something that came from quiet moments and private feelings. Going alone felt right, like giving themselves a gift. Over the next few days, anticipation grew slowly. They imagined the sound of real instruments, the atmosphere of the hall, the feeling of being surrounded by others who came for the same reason, to experience something beautiful. They wondered what the first note would feel like, how the air in the hall would move with the sound. The night before the concert, the listeners sat in their room with a soft piece playing. They felt grateful. Grateful for that morning in the cafe, for the small moment that had changed so much. Grateful for the curiosity that led them here. Grateful for the music that gently reshaped their days. As the music played, the listener closed their eyes and breathed deeply. They felt calm, peaceful, and quietly excited for what was coming next. They didn't know it yet, but the live concert would become one of the most powerful moments of their life, a moment that would stay with them forever. The evening of the concert arrived more quickly than the listener expected. All week, they had imagined what the experience might feel like. But now that the day had come, there was a nervous excitement in their chest. It wasn't the kind of nervousness that came from fear, it was the kind that came from stepping into something new, something that felt important, even if they couldn't explain why. After getting ready, the listener left home earlier than necessary. They wanted time to settle their thoughts before entering the hall. The sky was slowly turning darker, with a soft orange glow remaining on the horizon. The city was quieter than usual, as if it was preparing for its own evening. The walk felt calm, and each step brought a mix of curiosity and anticipation. When they arrived at the concert hall, the first thing they noticed was the warm light shining from the tall windows. People were walking in slowly, dressed in all kinds of clothing, some in formal wear, others in simple outfits. There was no single way to dress for music, the listener realized. Everyone had come for the same reason, to experience something beautiful, standing at the entrance. The listener took a deep breath. A soft hum of voices filled the air, like a gentle wave of excitement. They stepped inside, feeling immediately welcomed by the quiet elegance of the place. The hall wasn't huge, but it had a charm that made it feel special. The walls were lined with smooth wooden panels, and the warm lighting made the space feel calm and inviting. The listener found their seat, which was somewhere in the middle, not too far from the stage, but not too close either. It was the perfect place to see everything clearly. The stage itself looked simple, but powerful, with rows of chairs neatly arranged for the musicians. Music stands waited silently, reflecting the soft lights above. Instruments rested in place, It's almost like they were sleeping before being awakened. People continued to enter and take their seats. Some whispered quietly to each other, others looked around with admiration. A few sat in silence, as if already preparing themselves for the performance. The listener felt surrounded by strangers, yet connected in a quiet way. Everyone had chosen to be here in this moment to listen. Then, slowly, the lights dimmed, and the soft conversations faded. A gentle hush spread across the hall. The musicians began walking onto the stage one by one, carrying their instruments with care. The listener watched with fascination. Each person seemed deeply focused, fully present. They weren't just performers, they were storytellers, about to share something meaningful. When the conductor stepped onto the stage, the audience offered a warm applause. The listener joined in, feeling the atmosphere grow richer. The conductor bowed slightly, then turned toward the orchestra. The moment felt almost sacred. A brief silence filled the hall. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was expectant, like the air was holding its breath. Then, first note arrived. It was soft, so soft that the listener almost wasn't sure if they heard it or felt it. A single violin began, letting out a gentle melody that seemed to float through the hall. Then another violin joined, then a cello, each adding its own voice to the growing sound. The music rose slowly, layer by layer, until it filled the space completely. The listener felt a wave of emotion rush through them. Hearing classical music on headphones had been calming, but hearing it live was entirely different. The sound wasn't just in their ears. It was in the air, in the seats, in their chest. Every vibration, every note, every breath of the instruments felt alive. The listener's eyes grew soft as they watched the musicians. The way the bow moved across the strings, the way the conductor guided every rise and fall, the way the sounds blended so perfectly it was like watching a living painting. The harmony was so delicate, yet so full. Each note had a purpose. Each pause had meaning. For a moment, the listener forgot where they were. They forgot about their busy days, their stress, their thoughts. They were completely inside the music, as if floating in a world made only of sound and feeling. As the first piece continued, the melody grew stronger, richer. There were moments when the entire orchestra played together, creating a sound so powerful that the listener felt chills run down their arms. Then there were moments when only a few instruments carried the melody. Leaving space for quiet emotions to rise, the listener felt their heartbeats slow, their breathing softened, their eyes gently focused on nothingness. They were experiencing the music, not just hearing it. When the first piece ended, the hall remained silent for a moment before applause filled the room. The listener clapped along, though their hands felt light, almost unsure, as if the performance had left them in a gentle daze. The second piece began soon after, this time with a deeper, more dramatic tone. The listener leaned forward slightly, feeling the intensity of the music grow. The orchestra moved together with perfect unity, every violin bow rising and falling at the same moment. The cellos adding depth, the brass providing bold strength, the woodwinds bringing smooth emotion. The listener felt the sound travel through their entire body. It was powerful, almost overwhelming in the best way. It felt like the music was speaking directly to their heart, telling a story without words. A story of highs and lows, of strength and softness, of moments that shape a life. At one point, the melody softened into a gentle passage, and the listener felt tears gather in their eyes, not from sadness, but from the beauty of the moment. They blinked softly, letting the emotion sit quietly without forcing it away. The piece ended with a strong finish, and the hall erupted into applause. The listener clapped with more confidence this time, feeling connected to the musicians, to the audience, to the entire experience. The final piece of the night was lighter, more joyful. It carried a bright energy that made the listener smile without realizing it. The music felt like sunshine after days of rain, like hope after a long wait. The rhythm made their fingertips tap slightly on their lap, as the instruments played in harmony. The listener felt a spark of excitement inside. This wasn't just music, it was life. Every note felt like a reminder that beauty still existed, that joy could be found in simple things. That sound could heal in ways words sometimes couldn't. When the final piece came to its end, the conductor lifted their hands in one last graceful motion, and the hall fell silent before bursting into applause louder than before. People stood, cheering with heartfelt gratitude. The listeners stood too, giving their whole appreciation to the musicians who had given so much through their performance. The musicians bowed together.
Oh.
Smiling warmly, the conductor bowed as well, and the lights slowly brightened as the performance came to a close. As people began gathering their things and talking softly, the listener remained seated for a moment, still absorbing everything. Their chest felt full, their mind peaceful, their heart open. It was a feeling they had never experienced before, not even close. Slowly, they stood up, walked out of the hall, and stepped into the cool night air. Everything felt different. The streetlights glowed softly, the air felt fresh, and even the distant city sounds seemed gentle. The listener walked slowly, not wanting the feeling to fade too quickly. They tried to hold on to the sound of the orchestra in their memory, the soft violins, the deep cellos, the rich harmonies. It felt like carrying a warm light inside their chest. On the way home, they reflected on the night. They realized that classical music wasn't just relaxing background sound. It wasn't something reserved for fancy gatherings or older people. It was human, raw, emotional, alive. It connected everyone, no matter their age. No matter their story, the listener felt thankful for every note they had heard. Every emotion that had risen, every quiet moment that had made them feel present and alive. Something inside them had opened wider, like a door that couldn't be closed again. When they reached home, they sat on the edge of their bed for a moment, hands resting on their lap. They didn't play any music right away. The silence felt full, not empty. It carried the echoes of the concert, the gentle beginning, the powerful middle, the joyful ending. Before sleeping, the listener whispered a small thought to themselves. I needed that. It was simple, but true. That night, they fell asleep easily, wrapped in the memory of the sounds that had touched their heart. The live concert had done something quietly extraordinary. It had shown the listener a new way to experience emotion, a new way to understand calm, strength, and beauty. And deep down, they knew this was only the beginning of their journey. The morning sun was still low when he opened his eyes. For a moment, he stayed still, listening to the soft breeze moving through the curtains. The night before had left him tired but hopeful. He had spent hours listening to recordings, taking notes, and trying to understand why certain classical pieces touched people so deeply. But now, with a new day in front of him, he felt ready to continue the journey he had started. He sat up slowly and reached for a notebook on the table beside his bed. The pages were already filled with thoughts from the past few days. Some ideas were messy, some were written clearly, but each one showed how serious he had become about understanding this world of music. He wasn't a trained musician, yet something inside him kept guiding him forward, pushing him to look deeper and feel more. After a quick breakfast, he stepped outside. The street was still quiet. Cars were parked neatly on both sides, and a few neighbors were watering their plants. He greeted them with a simple smile and continued down the sidewalk. He wasn't heading anywhere special. He just needed a walk. Something to clear his mind before he met the old teacher again later, that afternoon. His steps slowed when he reached a small park. Children were not there yet, and the benches were empty. A gardener swept fallen leaves into a pile. The soft sound of the broom brushing the ground made him pause. Even that had a rhythm too. It had calm, steady rhythm. He smiled at the thought. Maybe music wasn't something only found in grand halls or in perfect recordings. Maybe it was hidden in simple moments like this. He took a seat on a bench near the fountain. The water was flowing gently, making a peaceful sound that blended nicely with the rustling leaves. He closed his eyes and tried to imagine a piece of music that would fit this moment. Maybe something soft, with strings playing long, gentle notes. He imagined a slow melody rising like the warm rays of the sun. It felt real enough that he almost believed he could hear it. When he finally stood up again, he felt more calm than before. He continued walking until he reached a small shop that sold old books and records. The owner, a friendly man with a warm smile, greeted him as soon as he entered. The smell of old paper and wooden shelves filled the room. He walked slowly between the rows, running his fingers across the edges of the record covers, looking for something special today. The shopkeeper asked. He shook his head. Just trying to learn more. Shopkeeper nodded. Music teaches you at its own speed. Don't rush it. Picked up a record with a simple black cover. There was no picture on it, only a title written in gold letters. He didn't recognize the composer. But there was something about the simplicity that caught his attention. "Ha, that one," the shopkeeper said with a soft smile. "Not many people notice it, but it's one of my personal favorites. Pure, calm, and honest." He bought it without thinking too much. It felt like something he needed to hear. A few hours later, he arrived at the house of the old teacher. The building looked the same as always, quiet, a bit worn down, but filled with a kind of charm that comes only with time. He knocked gently, and the teacher opened the door. The old man's eyes were warm and sharp. "Come inside," he said. They sat in the small living room. Sheets of music were stacked everywhere on the table, on the shelves, even on the floor near the piano. It looked chaotic, but somehow it also felt right. "You said you had questions last time," the teacher said, sitting in his usual chair. He took a breath. "I want to understand why classical music can make people cry, or smile, or remember things they forgot for years. I want to understand how it affects the human heart." The old teacher tapped a finger slowly on the armrest. "People think classical music is complicated, but deep down, it is simply honest. It doesn't try to fool you. It doesn't hide its emotion. It speaks openly, whether it's about pain, love, fear, or hope." He leaned forward. "But how do I explain that to others?" The teacher chuckled softly. "You don't explain it with words. You let the music do the talking. Your job is only to guide people toward the experience." The old man stood up and walked to the piano. With slow, steady hands, he lifted the cover and touched the keys. He didn't start with a big, loud piece. Instead, he played a soft tune, something delicate and full of emotion. Every note floated through the room like a whisper. Some notes rose gently, while others fell like soft drops of rain. The young man listened with his eyes closed. He felt something warm spread through him, something he couldn't explain. When the last note faded, the room stayed silent for a moment. "Music isn't about perfection," the teacher said softly. "It's about connection." They spent the next hour talking. The teacher shared stories about how music had shaped his own life, how it helped him through lonely nights, how it reminded him of people he lost, and how it kept him hopeful even during difficult times. The young man listened carefully, feeling each story sink deeper into his understanding. When the visit ended, he walked home with the record he had bought earlier. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in soft orange and pink colors. He felt like the world had slowed down, giving him space to breathe. Back home, he placed the record gently on the player. The first sound was a soft, slow hum. Then a simple melody began, not too grand, not too dramatic, just calm. It filled the room with warmth. As he listened, he imagined all the people in the world who might be sitting somewhere at that very moment, listening to classical music for comfort, strength, or peace. Maybe a tired mother resting after a long day. Maybe a student sitting awake at night trying to find focus. Maybe someone feeling lonely, searching for something to help them feel less alone. He realized then that classical music wasn't just something played in big concert halls or studied by experts. It belonged to everyone. And that made his journey feel even more meaningful. The record continued to play, and he allowed his thoughts to wander. He remembered the first time he had heard a classical piece that truly touched him. He remembered how confused he was at first, how he didn't understand why he felt something so strong. Now he knew it was because music speaks in a language that the heart understands before the mind does. Later that night, he wrote in his notebook again. His words flowed more easily this time. He wrote about the teacher's lesson, about the record shop, about the quiet moments in the park. And he wrote about how music had started to shift something inside him. He didn't know where this journey would end. But he knew he was not the same person he had been a week ago. Music had opened a door inside him that he didn't even know existed. He closed the notebook and rested his head back. The soft melody of the record was still playing, like a gentle reminder that he wasn't alone. And maybe in a way no one ever truly was, as long as there was music that could speak for them. He looked toward the window. The night sky was clear, and the stars were small but bright. It made him think about all the things in life that seem simple from far away. It holds so much depth when looked at closely. He sat quietly for a long time, thinking about how he could share this experience with others. He wanted people to know that classical music wasn't boring or too difficult. It was warm, powerful, and full of life. It was something everyone should experience at least once. Before going to sleep, he listened to the last track on the record. It was slower than the others, almost like a whisper. The emotion behind it was strong. It felt like someone telling a story without using any words. He closed his eyes and let the music guide him into the quiet of the night, feeling grateful for everything he had learned so far and ready for whatever would come next. The night was calm, and the air carried a gentle chill when he woke up earlier than usual. For a while he simply lay still, listening to the faint hum of the ceiling fan and the quiet outside. It felt like one of those mornings where something inside a person shifts, slowly but clearly. He could not explain it, but he felt it. The journey he had been on for days had settled into him in a way he hadn't expected. Music had become more than a curiosity. It turned into something personal, something he could not imagine letting go of. He sat up and rubbed his eyes. The room was dim, the soft blue of early dawn touching the walls. His notebook rested on the small table near his bed, its pages filled with thoughts, questions, and reflections. He reached for it and flipped through the earlier pages. The handwriting was uneven, sometimes rushed, sometimes calm. Each sentence showed how far he had come. He smiled slightly. He had not planned for any of this. He had only wanted to understand why classical music made him feel something new. But now it had opened a door inside him that kept leading him forward. After washing up, he stepped outside. A soft mist still hovered over the ground. The street was empty except for a man walking his dog at a slow pace. The sky was still waking up, painted in light shades of gray and orange. He breathed deeply and started walking toward the small park he had visited many times before. It had become a place where he could think without pressure. Reaching the park, he sat on his usual bench. The fountain was running, its gentle sound blending with the quiet morning air. Birds were just beginning to stir, making soft chirping sounds from the trees. He liked this moment of the day. Everything seemed honest, simple, untouched. He closed his eyes and tried to imagine the kind of music that could match this morning. Something soft, maybe with a slow piano line or warm strings. Something that rose slowly, like the sun, pushing away the darkness without force. He imagined the melody unfolding gently, as if guiding someone from confusion to clarity as he sat. There, an older woman approached with a small bag of bread for the birds. She smiled kindly when she saw him. "Beautiful morning," she said. He nodded. "It really is." She sprinkled the crumbs near the bench, and a few small birds hopped closer. After a moment she spoke again. "You look deep in thought. Music in your head?" He smiled in surprise. "Yes, actually. I'm trying to understand it better." The woman nodded slowly. "Music is like a friend. It sits with you even when no one else does." He thought about her words as she walked away. She wasn't a musician or a teacher, yet she understood something important. Music connected people from different lives, different ages, without needing any explanation. Later that morning, he made his way back home and prepared himself for one last visit to the old teacher. It felt like the final chapter of something. Not the end of his journey, but the end of the beginning. When he arrived at the teacher's house, the old man was already standing at the door, as if he had been expecting him. "Come in," the teacher said with a gentle nod. The living room looked the same as before, stacks of sheet music, old records, and the familiar piano at the center of it all. But today, the room felt different. It felt like a place where something important was about to be passed forward. They sat down, and the young man spoke first. "I feel like I understand more now," he said softly. "But I also feel like I'm just at the start." The teacher smiled. "That is how it should be. Music is not something you finish learning. It grows with you." The young man hesitated, then added, "I want to share it with others." I want people to know what I felt. I want them to experience the same calm, the same strength. The old teacher leaned back in his chair, and don't try to make them understand the technical parts. Don't talk to them about notes or scales or harmony. Tell them stories. Show them how music changed you. People connect to people first, not to explanations. He listened carefully. It made sense. His journey had been emotional, personal, full of quiet moments and unexpected feelings. Maybe others would connect to that more than anything else. The teacher stood and walked to the piano again. Let me show you something. He played a short piece, simple, gentle, and warm. The melody was not grand or dramatic, it sounded like a small truth being spoken softly. When the last note faded, the teacher looked up. See, you didn't need any long explanation to feel something. Sometimes the smallest piece speaks the loudest. The young man lowered his head for a moment, letting the music settle inside him. Thank you, he said quietly. The old man nodded. When you share music with someone, remember that you are not giving them a performance. You're giving them a moment. That moment can stay with them for years. They talked for a long time about life, emotions, and the simple truths hidden in melodies. The young man felt grateful. He knew he had been given something rare, not just knowledge, but understanding. Before he left, the teacher placed a hand on his shoulder. Wherever your path leads, let music walk with you. It will not let you down. The words echoed in his mind as he stepped outside. The afternoon sun was warm, and the sky was clear. He took a slow breath, feeling a strange mix of endings and beginnings. On his way home, he stopped by the small shop where he had bought the record earlier. The owner waved at him warmly. Back again? The man asked. Yes, he said with a smile. I wanted to thank you. That record meant a lot to me. The shopkeeper nodded. Music finds the right ears at the right time. The young man spent a few minutes browsing, not to buy anything, but to enjoy the quiet comfort of the place. He realized how many small moments had guided him during his journey at Melody. A teacher's words, a stranger's comment, a record shop owner's smile. All these pieces had shaped him. When he returned home, he placed the record gently on the player again. As the music began, he sat down with his notebook. This time, he didn't overthink. He simply wrote from the heart. He wrote about how music had changed him, how it had calmed him, encouraged him, and opened something inside him that he didn't know was closed. He wrote about how he wanted others to feel what he felt, not out of pressure, but because everyone deserved a chance to find peace in something so simple and honest. The words flowed easily, almost effortlessly. He wrote about the peaceful morning in the park, the gentle sound of water from the fountain, the warm advice from the older woman, and the way the teacher's piano filled a room with truth even without a single word. Hours passed without him noticing. By the time he stopped writing, the room had grown darker. The soft evening light had settled in. He leaned back and closed his eyes while the music continued to play. He felt whole, calm, and quietly strong for the first time. He understood that classical music was not just something to listen to. It was something to feel. It was something that walked beside people during their hardest days and their most peaceful nights. It was something everyone should experience at least once. As the final notes of the record faded into silence, he looked around his room and felt a sense of quiet joy. He had found something precious, something that would stay with him for a lifetime. He closed his notebook gently, ready for whatever came next. Music had shown him a new way to see the world, and he knew he would carry that with him forever.